Giribharadhari
Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari
Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Giribharadhari
Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari
Yashodanandana Raja Janaranjana
Yashodanandana Rajajanaranja
Yashodanandana Raja Janaranjana
Yashodanandana Rajajanaranja
Natira Vanachari
Yamunatira Vanachari
Yamunatira Vanachari
Yamunatira
Jaya Radha Madhava Jabirari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Shri Radhe Prabhupada, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. All blessings and devotees, devotees of blessings and devotees. Hare Krishna. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Thirayet Nashtapraishu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Paramananda Bhathaya Premavashaksharayate Sarvada Sarvasevyaya Shri Krishnaya Namostume. So today we're starting the next chapter of the 4th canto of the 27th chapter of the 4th canto. So the last one was King Paramjana going to the forest. And we're doing verses 1 through 5. So now King Paramjana is returning home. And we're going to unpack a little bit of the symbolism surrounding that. Narada Uvacha Itam Puranjanam Satyam Vashamani Vidkramai Puranjani Maharaja Reme Ramayati Padim. The great sage Narada continued, "My dear king, after bewildering her husband in different ways and bringing him under her control, the wife of King Puranjana gave him all satisfaction and enjoyed sex life with him." Saraja Manshim Rajan Susnatam Ruchiranam Kritaswasya Yadam Tripta Abhyananda Upagatam. The queen took her bath and dressed herself nicely with all auspicious garments and ornaments. After taking food and becoming completely satisfied, she returned to the king. Upon seeing her beautifully decorated, attractive face, the king welcomed her with all devotion. Tayo pagoda parirabdha kandharo ramo namantar prakrishta jetana nakalaramho bhuvade duratyayam ivanisheti namada parigraha. Queen Puranjani embraced the king, and the king also responded by embracing her shoulders. In this way, in a solitary place, they enjoyed joking words. Thus, King Puranjana became very much captivated by his beautiful wife and deviated from his good sense. He forgot that the passing of days and nights meant that his span of life was being reduced without profit. Shayana Unnathamado Mahamana Mahanatalpe Mahishi Vujopati Tam Eva Viro Manute Param Yatas Tamo Puto Nanijam Param Chayat. In this way, increasingly overwhelmed by illusion, King Puranjana, although advanced in consciousness, remained always lying down with his head on the pillow of his wife's arms. In this way, he considered woman to be his ultimate life and soul. Becoming thus overwhelmed by the mode of ignorance, he could not understand the meaning of self-realization, whether regarding his own self or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Tayayivam Ramamanasya Kamakashmalachetasa Kshanardamiva Rajendra Vyatikrantam Navamvayaha. My dear King Prachinabarhisha, in this way King Puranjana, with his heart full of lust and sinful reactions, began to enjoy sex with his wife, and in this way his new life and youth expired in half a moment. Om Gyanatiminandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurinmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutade Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Tapadakamanam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sarvajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitantam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devinam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namoste Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishavanguste Devi Pranamami Priye Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishishunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchagopaturibhyascha Kripasindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangumam Gayate Yatrapam Tamaham Vande Shri Gurun Dinataranam. So, just to give a little backdrop here, chapter 26 was mainly focused around because this is a big allegory that represents the Atma's journey in material life. Chapter 26 was centered around the Jiva going and performing adharma. going and doing things that are against the natural flow of the way the universe is set up for the sake of his own selfish enjoyment. Going out to the forest and hunting is the analogy that's given, and acquiring so many sinful reactions for doing that. So this is the selfish plight that most of us find ourselves in this world at one point or another, constantly kind of oscillating between this and then trying to do the right thing. So, or whatever we arbitrarily understand to be the right thing. So the end of chapter 26 is the coming to clarity that everybody has after they do some kind of, level or other of impious activity. At some point, we realize it's time to come home. So Puranjana comes home from the forest and he sees that his intelligence, Puranjani, his wife, is distraught and she's lying on the ground, and he tries to comfort her. And this is the representation of him coming back to Dharma, coming back to his rightly situated intelligence, guided in the proper way, and then trying to execute his life in a way that will eradicate those sins and will eradicate, whatever he's done before. We hear from Parikshit Maharaj in the 6th canto that atonement is like the bathing of an elephant, because one just oscillates back and forth. Yes, you can atone as long as you don't do something grave like Vaishnava Aparad. You do some bad things and then you atone for the bad things, and then after a while you become complacent and you're a little bored and you do some more bad things, and it's kind of like a give and take and finding a balance. So King Puranjana, he's going through this, but there's something that's very interesting that Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur brings up in the first verse of this new chapter. He explains actually that dharmic execution that comes at the end of the 26th chapter was racked with guilt, because one can't just forget that one was performing adharma before, and actually there's kind of like an interim period where, okay, you're doing the right thing, but you understand that you were doing the wrong thing for such a long period of time, and that actually stops one from being able to be absorbed in dharma, what to speak of the higher pursuits above dharma, particularly moksha, or for us bhakti. So this very interesting kind of schism is brought up, and I'd like to unpack that a little bit, because it's the main facility of dharma is that it provides one with the peace of mind to not have to worry about the difficulties of life. It allows the mind to be a little bit sober so that one can actually think about higher topics. And if one is oscillating between trying to execute some dharma and carrying out adharma, then one is naturally going to be stuck in that kind of interim period, which is really kind of maybe one of the most hellish places that one can be. Stuck in that place of kind of guilt and shame and, just not being able to think about anything that actually matters in your life because you're just eaten up by that. Actually, Sri Vishwanath uses very strong words. He says that King Puranjana, even though he was performing dharma and he was doing all these right things, he was torn apart. He was just ripped apart by the guilt that he was feeling for what he had done, because the contamination, the vasanas, these impressions that came from the hunting that he was doing were still in his mind. And it takes time to eradicate those. And so the 27th chapter, which we're starting, it represents the period of time after his clearing of those vasanas and those impressions. So the end of the 26th chapter is when he begins to do dharma and goes through the period of clearing away on a mundane level all of those vasanas and those impressions. And the 27th chapter, or the beginning of it anyway, where we're covering today, represents dharma that is situated in its proper place. And when he starts to feel the benefits of being free from the mental anxieties that come from thinking, oh, what reaction is going to come my way? I did something, I'm doing a little bit of dharma now, but I'm coming off the back end of a whole bunch of really unsavory stuff. So I find this very interesting, because it's very good for us that if we understand this principle, that actually Dharma is a very useful tool that if I can align myself with proper principles, then I can avoid this guilt that really, I can speak for myself, has eaten me up at one time or another. I think every devotee goes through periods where they think, oh, I'm not pure enough to do this, or look how bad it is, the way I'm acting, or the way, the way I'm carrying myself. And it actually kind of blocks us. Because of that guilt, it blocks us from being able to think about anything but that. It blocks us from being able to kind of move forward with our lives. Whereas Dharma may be a lot harder. It may be difficult. What is that? Ashrama. A lot of people think ashrama means shelter, but ashrama means work, like the verse Shrama Evehi Kevalam. It's all just useless work. So Shrama means work, and ashrama means extremely hard work. But when you're situated in an ashrama, when you're situated in Dharma, then you're working, but that work gives you a sense of peace because you know that you're aligned with proper principles. You can sleep well at night. You may work really, really hard, but you can sleep well at night. You don't have anxieties because I'm doing the best I can. I'm actually executing this to the highest of my ability. And what this does is it affords peace of mind, and it affords us the ability to then think about things that are above our particular situation and get out of that cycle of anxiety and grief that is perpetuating our kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Our making compromises in this world and just kind of staying on that platform. So I think this is a really interesting point. And I'm just remembering in our Bhagavatam Sangha, we spoke about Yayati, King Yayati at length, and he's actually glorified in the Bhagavatam in the 19th chapter. When there's a description of Parikshit Maharaj, Parikshit is compared in Dharma to Yayati. So Yayati's example is actually used as a way to show that Parikshit Maharaj had the highest dharmic character. And this isn't so obvious to a lot of us who have just had a cursory reading of Yayati's pastime, because the way it's presented to us generally, and the way we do it in ISKCON, the way we generally read that because of our particular understanding, is that Yayati was this rascal who was just super addicted to sex life and, was just basically a bogus guy, as per the estimation of any Hare Krishna. But Yayati, his specialty was that he enjoyed, but he enjoyed with an honest heart, and he did what he did dharmically. So everything he did was according to the principles of Dharma. Therefore, he enjoyed with his wife for 1,000 years, and he enjoyed sex life basically to the fullest extent that one could in material existence on the particular realm that he was in. But he was actually able to carry out his bhajan right next to that without any guilt. Why? Because he was doing it according to the principles of Dharma. So it wasn't eating him. He wasn't being torn apart like we're hearing about Puranjana, who went out into the forest, threw aside his intelligence, threw aside the regulations of Dharma, and tried to enjoy wholesale, and just tried to say, well, let me take as much as I can. So yeah, I just think that's pretty interesting. Now, there's a catch, because Dharma isn't the goal. Dharma isn't the end. And this is what Narada Muni leads into in the next couple of verses. He explains that King Puranjana, he gets free of the guilt via Dharma, but then because of the ensnaring nature of Dharma, because Dharma and that sense of peace and that sense of kind of stability that one gets from that execution, it's very, very enchanting, especially for somebody who was previously racked with guilt over their life being kind of in shambles because they weren't executing those principles. And so Puranjana, he becomes completely wholesale attached to that dharmic execution and the enjoyment that one is afforded there. And then he decides, or rather he doesn't decide, he just takes it for granted that that is the actual goal of life. And so Narada Muni, he's explaining this, and he's going to explain later on in the chapter the detriments of taking this ideal and thinking that, now I have a comfortable situation, I'm somewhat in sattva-gun, and everything is going quite well for me. I should just maintain this. Kind of from a Christian perspective, we call it a prosperity gospel. I do what God asks me to do, and then God gives me nice things, and my kids go to school, and I have a beautiful wife and 2 or 3 cars, and I can put my kids through school. All of these things. So this also isn't the goal. And actually, this is something that has to be watched out for. But I think it's much more prudent to tell people that they should start moving towards making dharmic adjustments in their life so they can get out of that kind of guilt phase, because that's where, especially in such a crazy topsy-turvy society as we live in now, that's where most people find themselves as devotees. As far as I've seen from talking to people and experienced in my own life. But this is the thing Narada Muni criticized Vyasadeva for in the beginning of the Bhagavatam. It's the 4th chapter. Vyasadeva is lamenting, and he's thinking, well, what have I not done? I don't feel totally satisfied. I wrote down the Vedas, I wrote the Mahabharata, I wrote down all the Puranas, I wrote everything down, and I've done it all for the benefit of the living beings in this world. But still, I'm feeling a little bit empty. I'm feeling like something hasn't been done properly. And he meditates on that, and at that moment, Narada Muni shows up. And Narada Muni questions him, tries to draw the answer out of him and make him think for himself. And then he tells him, because Vyasadeva says, please tell me unequivocally, please tell me what it is that's eating me up here. And Narada Muni says, well, you've given too much credit to the people of this world. You've written all of these things, but you've written them in such a way that it's way, way, way too gradual. The people of Dwapara Yuga, the people of Treta Yuga, the people of Satya Yuga, they could understand your writings, and they wouldn't get lost, or at least most of them, because King Pranjana isn't in Kali Yuga, so even him, his example is there, and King Prachinnaparisha is not in Kali Yuga, but especially in Kali Yuga, this danger is there. That people will become wrapped up in religious activity, and they'll start getting some benefits from it. They'll start getting benefits from doing anything regulated. What to speak of something that's regulated and also empowered and is able to manipulate the way the gunas are manifested in this world in a positive way. People will get wrapped up in that, and they will take that as nishrayasa. They will take that as the highest goal of life, because it's so much better than anything else they've experienced. He says, you've told people to kill animals, and therefore, because they like killing animals, they'll do it in a regulated way. They won't suffer for that animal killing, and then they'll think, yes, this is religion. This is what I need to be doing. This is what my purpose is, and so on and so forth. So Narada Muni directly criticizes Vyasadeva, or he doesn't criticize him, he more like chastises him. He says, you've given these people too much credit, so you've got to speak a little more directly. And you've also got to glorify Hari more directly. You've spoken about Krishna here and there in your writings, but you need to speak directly about Krishna and explain to people how they can actually get to the highest goal. So this goes right along with what Narada Muni is telling King Pranjana here. Sorry, he's telling King Prachinnaparisha here. I'm doing what David does because the 2 P's on Prachinnaparisha and King Pranjana. So he's telling King Prachinnaparisha here that don't get stuck like this Pranjana. Okay, you've stopped doing adharma. Don't go out and kill animals. Don't do, make sure everything you do is dharmic. But then when you get the results of dharma because you're a king, don't also get wrapped in that and don't get stuck in that. You have to think about moksha. You have to think about the things that actually matter, because the thing is, the sun is stealing your days. Prabhupada writes in the purport here, he says, ignorant men, they don't understand that every time the sun rises, it's stealing their time. The sun is taking their time, and they go on, they think, oh, I have time. I have this time. Oh, yeah, so many more days. Anyway, I'm 27 now, and, it's coming. It's not going too fast. I still have some time. But this is a big illusion. One, because we don't know at all how much time we have. I may not have till tomorrow, if I'm honest, and if not honest, but if I really look at the situation, I may not have until tomorrow. And 2, we should understand that this is the biggest mistake that everybody makes. What is that? Yamaraj asked Yudhishthira, what is the most, illogical thing that you observe in this world? What is the craziest thing in this world? And he says, everyone is what? Say again?
Wonderful.
The most wonderful there. What is the most wonderful thing? And Yudhishthira Maharaj says the most wonderful thing is that everyone sees everyone die. And everyone thinks I will not die. Everyone thinks I have time. Similarly, I remember reading there was a study. One nurse, she was in wasn't a study, she just started asking people because she was in what's it called? End of palliative care, right? End of life care. And so she just started thinking, these people probably have some wisdom. So I'm just gonna start asking these people questions rather than just taking care and trying to comfort them. I'm gonna start asking them about their lives. And she would ask a kind of a set of questions that she had built. And one of them was, what is your main regret? And the number one thing that she got, maybe I think it was like more than half of all the people said, my number one regret is that I wasted my time. That I didn't spend time with the things that actually matter. And I just passed my time. I let life kind of live me rather than living life. So we're all under this illusion that we have lots and lots of time. But we don't have lots and lots of time. We have very, very little time. And the realization of that is quite a blessing. And we have to stay around people who are also living like that so that we can kind of catch that wave. Because otherwise we may go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years and then just realize, oh man, I just didn't apply myself. I didn't actually try to get something done in this life. It's quite easy to slip into this complacency, especially when we're juggling the fact that we have responsibilities and then we also have something that's above those responsibilities, like our practice of bhakti. So, for regular people, it's totally justifiable to just pull your act together and maintain yourself. But for us, it's doubly difficult because you have to maintain yourself so that you can do what actually matters. Which, again, that's the basis for all of society. So in one sense, we're just living, normal life when it's actually normal. It's a kind of a shining example of the fact that society is so degraded now that actually that whole section of the purpose of life has just basically been completely destroyed. And people are allowed to just think that the simple maintenance of, their existence is the all in all. But yeah, we should try to keep this stuff in mind, and therefore we have the Bhagavatam, because Srimad-Bhagavatam is a constant reminder. This is why we have to touch this book consistently, regularly, because this book helps to remove all of that kind of fog that sets in and stops us from being able to perceive what our life is actually for. Causes us to lament about the past, to worry about what's going to happen in the future, to be, in anxiety about what's happening right now. What is it? To lament about what's happening right, to be bewildered about the present, to lament about the past, and to be in anxiety about the future. The Bhagavatam has the special power to just kind of sober us up and remove us from that and help us to understand that, wow, it doesn't seem like it's the most practical thing right now, but if I read this book for 10 minutes a day, then I can get a little bit of peace, and then I can actually ponder, and then make a judgment call on what action needs to be done. So, I don't know, maybe if there's I'll stop a little early today, maybe if we have a little discussion on this. I particularly like this point and would like to hear what you guys think about the kind of degrading nature of adharma and how difficult it is, or how it's so kind of seductive is the wrong word, but in the insidious nature of the fact that even when you start doing the right things, then it takes some time to clear your consciousness from doing the wrong things. So, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts.
One good thing.
Well, it's now.
One devotee from Kodan, trained in Shabbat, is the temple president Kodan, Rohini Kriyakarma. Remember asking him years ago, right, 7 years ago, when he visited here, how long it would be that these tendencies. Basically, Tamagun is how I framed it. How long will it be that Tamagun is still so readily available in my mind and consciousness, and so easy to default to? And he said something very sobering. I like the way that he framed it. He said, "These things will haunt you as long as you have a material body." And the use of that word haunt, like a ghost, out of nowhere. You open the closet or underneath the bed, what have you, just suddenly there it is, and you thought that it had gone away.
Yeah.
And since him saying that to me for now 6-7 years, my realization on it has been that I can't let my guard down.
Yeah.
Srila Prabhupada speaks of it as the wild animal, that you may cage it up, you may gain some decorum with it, some kind of routine that the wild animal gets into with you. You feed it this time, you walk it that time. You never, though, turn your back on a wild animal. You always anticipate that it could bite me.
Yeah.
Could kill me. And that's been my experience with these things. As soon as we get lazy, as soon as we think, I've got it figured out now, I'm coasting, I've passed over that. The ghost of the reality of Tamagun in my existence for however many lifetimes comes back.
It catches me by surprise.
Yeah. That actually reminds me, I've never been able to find the reference, but I've heard that somewhere some Acharya says Shakata represents that. And I remember that devotee told me that in a period where I was really going through quite a protracted example of that. And like that very morning when I was kind of being tortured by this thing that I thought I had gotten over after, 3 or 4 years of just being like, that's gone, and then it just like rears its ugly head. And this devotee came and told me, oh yeah, that's one of the anarthas that Shakatasura represents. And I've never been able to find the reference, so I don't quote it often, but I'm just reminded of that, like this, that yeah, it's like there's layers of this stuff. And it kind of peels back and comes out. And we really need to be nicely situated so that when that happens, we'll be able to be strong in that moment. It's like, otherwise you're really not going to stand a chance. These things just, it's like a horse. You're not actually in control, of a horse. It's tolerating you. It's like if a horse wants to throw you off, unless you're really expert, and that's with a regular horse. The mind's not a regular horse. If it wants to throw you off and smash you, it's going to be no problem, really. It's really a matter of kind of making a deal with it. Actually, I didn't want to say this because it sounds like a really brahmachari thing to say, but I mean it nicely. I was noticing, particularly, yesterday I was noticing the kids running around and just really doing what kids do. And I was like, this is the mind, it just doesn't mind at all, no pun intended. It doesn't care at all for anything other than the immediate, and it's just like, I like that thing that's hanging above the stairs, and it doesn't think, I might fall down the stairs and like bang myself the heck up, except the mind isn't the thing that's going to get banged up. I'm the one who's going to get banged up. But if I just allow the mind to just go where it wants and follow it around, go ahead, you can do that, then, I'm going to be the one that gets banged up. So it's really a matter of just having the ability to, that's what I was running, because Lokram was also giving the class, and he was talking about how you just tell, give us 10 minutes, 20 minutes, give me an hour, just because the mind will say, I want this. And I was just thinking about him sitting there like a week ago giving Bhagavatam class and Janaki in his lap. And she's like kicking him in the face and kicking the microphone and grabbing him and pulling on his stuff. He's like, yeah, we're almost done. Come on, we're almost there, we're almost done. And I was just thinking, wow, it must be such like powerful practical training as to how to deal with your mind. It's a long training set, but it's what most people need to go through. It must be so powerful that you have kids and then you sit down to do bhajan when you're 50, and you're like, oh yeah, this isn't so hard. This is exactly like my 5-year-old was, I'm trying to chant japa. And also like, oh, but what about, what are they having for prasadam? Like, yeah, we'll get to that. If you just sit there. I was thinking about that. Yeah, it's interesting. Anyway, anything else, anybody?
I just want to ask a question before I like the framing you were giving around Vyasadeva Narad's connection, and it seems as though he was complaining about not speaking well enough to his audience. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, that's what Narada Muni was saying. As far as I think for Vyasadeva, it was more of he just didn't know. He had this sinking feeling that I didn't do what I set out to do in the best possible way.
Mm-hmm.
And then Narada Muni came. It's a bit of a difficult topic to unfold as far as exactly how he was bewildered, because I mean they're both incarnations of God. Like Narada Muni is Shaktivation, Vyasadeva is Shaktivation.
Yeah, I just reread the section, so I like that. It's like bad preaching, basically.
Yeah.
Not that he didn't understand something, but that it's bad preaching.
Yeah, and as a sidebar, also, we shouldn't take it in the other direction that everything else is useless. Because sometimes we take that Narada Muni censured Vyasadeva, and Vyasadeva wrote all these other useless things, but he also didn't throw them away after. They still have use. The other Puranas, the Vedas, all these things are also useful. Just that the Bhagavatam needed to be there so people would have an opportunity to take up direct bhakti, and so that path would be laid out as well. It's very distasteful for me when people, because Prabhupada uses heavy words there, and then if we just take Prabhupada's heavy words out of context, we don't understand the overarching thing.
It's our typical Western approach. We just think we can annihilate everything else.
Yeah.
Blow it up.
Yeah.
Two things. First one is I was appreciating this point about being properly situated, and of course we don't want to obsess over our material situation, but there is definitely something to being properly situated in our devotional service. And I've also had the experience of being burned out and everything from just being totally wrongly situated in the service. And so then when that kind of ugly demon rears its head, you just have no facility to protect yourself. You're just totally destroyed.
Yeah.
So from that experience, I realized how important it is to be situated as best as you can according to your means. But in order to give yourself as much of a kind of leg up, or a head start in the race against the mind. And so I've also observed how for many devotees, they're not properly situated. And there was this kind of stigma around trying to have a nice situation. It's you just gotta get out there and do it, otherwise, you're a weakling.
Yeah.
But the fact is we are weak without having strong devotions, strong bhakti, because I remember hearing a lecture of my Guru Maharaj, and he was saying that in the material world for the Vaishnava, literally everything is against us. Everything is against us as bhaktas, Krishna bhaktas. So it's it's not going to be easy. You really have to be, and that kind of leads into my second appreciation is this idea of or point of being vigilant. Of always being on your guard. And which can sometimes be exhausting, to just always be oh my God, at any moment my mind is just gonna, you can get tired of fighting in that way. But it's super, super important. And I think in that way, those two things kind of go together, trying to have the right situations to maximize your vigilance. And I think one of my favorite verses is, having that one point of focus. And so it really speaks to devotional service being a way of life, because it's just it's not just in the morning I do my bhakti and the rest of the day I do whatever I want. It's really moment to moment, and that's kind of something that is sometimes difficult to accept because we're so used to just switching off to that lazy autopilot, just rolling like a what do you call it? Tumbleweed, just going through the motions. But that, it's either you're in Krishna consciousness or you're in Maya. There's not really in between, really, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So it's just like having to kind of constantly stay on that kind of higher level. So yeah, so I was just appreciating that and meditating on how important that is, and just thinking about how much I would like to apply that in my own life, because it's just like, yeah, to really get that strength, you need that kind of consistency and that gravity also, and soberness of understanding the reality of the material world and how nobody's on your side outside of the devotee association. It's like, so, yeah.
Yeah, I also really appreciate this. Something that's come to me recently is that actually, even if you want to enjoy, dharmic enjoyment is the best kind. Because the way this world works, if you try to go headlong into enjoyment in an improper way, it creates, because there's an imbalance there, it kind of creates a rubber band effect, and then you suffer like anything. So we have to understand that if at the basis of it we want some sobriety and clarity in our life, then we need to have a regulated existence. And that actually becomes an addicting thing in and of itself, which Narada Muni obviously here, he's also warning Ramjuna, but that's because he's also not giving him the highest understanding of bhakti adhikar. This is a mixed bhakti and jnana bag that Narada Muni is preaching. But for us as devotees, we have to realize that it's a matter of doing our bhakti in a way that's going to help us run the marathon of life and is going to allow us to be peaceful enough to continue to do it, like you said. And then that makes everything a lot more clear, and we stop thinking in this like trajectory of like, all right, I have to do it really hard and then become realized really quickly. But actually, when we do bhakti with a desire for self-realization, then that's not bhakti. There's a verse in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that says that one cannot get taste as long as they're haunted with the desire for both karmic activity or for moksha. So if we do bhakti with the desire to attain liberation from the situation that we're in, from the sufferings that we may be undergoing, then we're not going to be able to get anywhere. So really, we do have to find this middle ground where we're just satisfied. We can be a little bit detached from whatever's going on, whether it's good or bad. And then we can just be peaceful enough to say, I want to serve Krishna. I always remember this quote from Radha Govinda Maharaj, Srila Radha Govinda Maharaj. He said, bhakti is so simple. You just come home from work, you put down your bag, and you sit in front of the deities and you say, oh, Thakurji, I just want to chant your name for you. And that's it. You just sit down and, like you said, you just turn your consciousness towards Krishna, because there's either Krishna consciousness or there's Maya consciousness. And that sounds sharp, but that's actually really nice, because it means at any one moment, in any situation that I'm in, whatever I'm doing, I can make the decision to turn my consciousness in that direction. Wherever I'm at, whatever job I'm working, whether I live in a temple 24/7, I take it from me, I've lived in temples for the past 7 years. It's very easy to go for long stints of time living in a temple without being Krishna conscious at all. Because it's simultaneously the easiest thing and the hardest thing to be Krishna conscious. It's easy because you literally just turn, all right, I'm going to focus on the holy name right now. But when you're surrounded by that, it's very easy to just be contemptuous and, oh yeah, now we're going to Mangal Arati again. And now, I didn't go to Mangal Arati. Now we're going to go to Guru Puja. Yeah, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada, breakfast, Prabhupada. And it's very like, yeah, it's simultaneously the easiest thing and the hardest thing, but the facility that's afforded there is very, very nice versus other types of sadhana, like Gyan, where it's like you're either not doing anything or you're not qualified for it. So yeah, I'll stop there unless there's anything else. Some questions? Use the bathroom. Oh my God, I feel like a 60-year-old man right now.
Look around Prabhu or Madhavi Mataji says a really powerful point, Prabhu, about the lingering guilt that prevents the practice of bhakti. Reminding me that this is one of the benefits of the samskara process. For example, a person takes initiation and has the memory of the experience. That, yes, now I am married, or now I am initiated, therefore I can move on. Similarly, in the Christian samskara of baptism.
Yeah, and I think also, especially with marriage, the experience, because direct experience is the most powerful thing in this world. So when you experience something, then you can actually become qualified to be detached from it. So samskaras, they lay out a series of experiences that then allows one's psychophysical nature to move on from that experience. And samskaras can be taken in a general way to mean any like lingering impression of an experience, or the Vedic samskaras, which are literally like, they're set up experiences that are basically meant to carve out one's psychophysical nature in a particular way so that they'll have the easiest attempt at moving towards param shreyas, at moving towards the goal of life. So yeah, those things are very, very powerful. I can't speak so much to the Christian ideal because I don't know much about it, and I'm admittedly quite disparaging of it because what I do know I don't really like. But I mean, yeah, baptism is a samskara, and if it's done sincerely and nicely, then I'm sure that can help to also pave one's ideal towards moving towards something higher than sense gratification. Thanks for that.
And Garrison Prabhu says, can you speak some more about the downfalls and potential usefulness of guilt? I'm not sure that I've ever felt it, and I need more context to understand better what it is and the best ways to manage it. Thank you.
The downfalls and potential usefulness of guilt. Well, guilt is kind of a two-way street. Guilt can either lead to ignorance, if it's like what we're talking about today is kind of the debilitating nature of guilt. That when you've been doing something that is against particularly your own established internal principles, then the feeling that you can't actually carry those things out kind of paradoxically makes you believe that you shouldn't. That, oh, I'm not good enough for this, I can't be a devotee, I'm just not, I'll never be enough for this, so I should just stop. So that's the debilitating nature of guilt. And this works for bhaktas, and it also works for people who are just trying to live their life in accordance with their own principles, whether those be religious principles or whether they just be whatever highest set of ideals they've imagined and are trying to carry out. Now the usefulness of guilt comes from, there's a particular verse if you want to look it up, 11, 20, 27, and 28, where the guilt of a devotee who is firmly fixed on the path of bhakti, but is unable to stop doing sense gratification, realizes that actually I understand that, okay, I'm doing these things, but the only thing that will purify me of this tendency is carrying out bhakti. So he finds himself in this place of, the verse actually calls it kind of happy guilt, where he's joyous because he's gotten the opportunity to do bhakti. He knows he's doing sense gratification, but he knows that if I do bhakti more intensely, even alongside with the sense gratification, eventually the bhakti is going to win. It's like if you take a glass of ink and you start to pour milk into it. At the beginning, it may look like it's hopeless, but if you keep pouring milk, because the way that works scientifically, I don't know the physics of it, eventually all the ink will be out of the glass. This doesn't work with water, it works with milk. And so the milk is the bhakti. So you can take the most contaminated person, the most contaminated thing, the most fallen whatever, and if you pour bhakti into that thing for long enough, that person will become pure. So the repentance that comes from the feeling of that interim period when you're still a glass full of ink and milk, the repentance and the feeling that I still have ink, but I know that if I keep pouring milk, eventually this ink will go away. That's the usefulness of guilt in bhakti. Because that guilt helps you pour more milk and helps you remove more of that bad stuff, that ink, because you become more resolved. So in my experience, this requires a lot of shraddha and it requires sadhu sangha. It requires one opening one's heart and saying, this is what I'm going through. And also talking to other devotees to understand that they're also going through it so we don't feel so alone. Because it's very easy when we're in this half milk, half ink period, our glass is full of both, to just isolate and think, I'm the only one who's going through this and I'm a terrible person and no one else has these problems. But in my experience, when I'm going through that, I'm still in that period. I won't say when I went through it. But in my experience, when I opened up about that, I started to realize, oh wow, yeah, a lot of my friends are also going through this. They're also a glass half full of ink and, I'm not so alone. And then that kind of removes that oppressive feeling of I'll never be able to do this. So, yeah, is there anything else there? I really need to.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention that Garrison said please use the restroom and come back right before we start talking.
Okay, Granth Srimad-Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Vaishnava